When I was younger and stupider and going to college in the North Georgia mountains, my friends and I would go night hiking a lot on the trails near campus. I got pretty familiar with the area, and being out in the wilderness at night in general, which probably made me too confident. One night the full moon was out, and the weather was perfect. So visibility was crazy good, everything was basically washed in dim blue light. I was slightly stoned, and feeling adventurous. And I love doing fun stuff alone, so I decided to go enjoy a night hike by myself. I took a flashlight, but this was around 2002, so no cell phone. I chose a super easy trail that was mostly flat / maybe a mile loop. In pretty secluded area, but not exactly a national park or anything, very rural area. I didn't even need my flashlight for most of it. And just hiked in the moonlight. It was actually a really cool / beautiful experience at first. At some point I started feeling uneasy, and maybe a millisecond later I heard a man's voice. It was coming from a good distance ahead of me. Somewhere off in the woods, maybe from the right side of the trail. He was crying. I'm honestly an empathetic person, and 99.9% of the time I hear someone crying I want to comfort / help them in some way. But this time I felt sick in the stomach, like a dry panic attack, if that makes sense. I remember coming very close to calling out to him. Because my brain was trying to tell me he might be hurt. Which was the only reason I hesitated. But it was like my body shut my voice down before I could say anything, and I knew I had to stay very quiet. He was sobbing like he'd just found out a loved one had died. But also gibbering, and almost babbling, like he was less than a person. There was a shrillness to it, under his crying. Like he was holding back a scream, but perpetually. On and on. As if he'd been doing it all night. I remember it vividly, and my spine is tingling like crazy even as I write this. It's hard to explain, but I knew deep down he wasn't right in the head. And nothing good would happen if he realized I was listening. I went back the way I came. It was like I had tunnel hearing. And the only sound in the world was that crying. I was hyper aware of everything else around me. And beyond paranoid that I would snap a branch, or snag my boot on something. I worried the man's crying would get louder if I wasn't paying razor sharp attention. Getting closer, or turn into an outraged crazy person scream. Thankfully it just faded the further I got from it, and I made it back to my car. Still, I was convinced some wild-eyed hermit was going to rush out of the forest and bite me to death. Right up to the second I locked my doors and got the fuck out of there. I finally had the rest of my panic attack on the drive back. I managed to park back at campus, and I just sat in the car and collected myself. Adrenaline is freaking powerful. I have never felt a shred of guilt about leaving that guy crying out in the woods in the dark. I know I was slightly stoned, but slightly is the key word there. I'm convinced to this day I was in very real danger that night. Definitely not as insane as most of the stories and threads like this. But sometimes I get that same sick feeling deep down. Whenever I wonder what might have happened if the moon been less bright. Or if I'd been more responsible, and I decided to use my flashlight even once. He'd have seen me for sure.
Wife and I were camping at Big Bend in TX. And in the middle of the night she wakes me up silently by shaking me hard. I can barely see her face in the moonlight, but I can tell she is terrified. I start to say something, but she covers my mouth, and points to the tent entrance. I turn my head and look out the screen flap. And a cougar is lying on the ground about 6 feet away, staring at us. I just froze, staring at it while it stared back. After what seemed an eternity to my frozen and freaked out self, it slowly got up and ambled away silently. No more fucking sleep that night.
Do you know what made her wake up? Did she hear it?
She didn't hear the cat at all, but said she woke up because it got quiet around us. Lack of noise, essentially.
This happened to me a few years ago. I used to go to school at the University of California, Santa Cruz. I'm a runner and the campus is in a beautiful redwood forest, so I would run on the trails. One day I left a little later than usual on a run through one of the more isolated trails. Here's where it gets weird. I was about 15 minutes running deep into the woods and still hadn't seen anyone else around. Suddenly, up ahead, I saw what appeared to be a homeless man in ragged clothing walking on the trail. Now, he was walking further into the woods, and this path went very far and the sun was setting. AKA this man was spending the night in the woods. I wanted to reach my usual running checkpoint before turning back, so I decided to keep my distance and run by. As soon as I passed the man he called out to me, "What came first, light or sound?" In my head I was like, WTF, this guy is nuts. But I decided to humor him and yelled out light without looking back. He said, "Well, I think it's sound, but who knows?" and started mumbling to himself. I continued on. I reached my goal and started to head back. It was really dark now and I was feeling sketched out that I had to pass this guy again to get back. He seemed pretty crazy and potentially dangerous, but I didn't have a choice. I got past the point where I first passed him, but he was nowhere to be seen. There weren't any other branches of the trail, and if he had headed back I would have seen him by then. He must have gone off the trail. Suddenly a girl from up on a hill screamed for me to stop. I stopped and looked up on the hill, but it was too dark to see anything. I was freaked out. I called out to ask if she was all right and eventually saw her climbing down. The hill was really steep, so she put in a lot of effort to get up there and away from whatever was after her. She said that she was on a run when a scary homeless guy started harassing her and he chased her up the hill. But she didn't know where he went. She was going to spend the night there until I came along because she was too scared to go back down. At this point we both wanted to get the hell out of there. Who knew if this creepy man was like lurking around watching us from the dark? So we ran back together and made it to the road. She thanked me and we parted ways. Never ran back on that trail again. Santa Cruz can be a pretty weird place. I've heard legends of students flunking out of school there and then just living in the forest. Maybe this guy was a student from years past.
Pretty late to the party, so this will probably be buried, but here it goes. One night my friend and I decided to hike to the top of this small mountain at night for a meteor shower. There were 4 of us, all around 16 at the time, and thought it would be cool. We drove over and started hiking. We took a break about halfway when we noticed there was a guy following us. In a business suit. We were weirded out, so we decided to start back up and walk a bit faster. But by the next time we stopped he was like 10 feet away, so we bit the bullet to see if he'd just walk by. He didn't. He stopped and asked if we were there for the meteor shower and if he could walk with us. We had a 30-something-year-old man in a suit wanting to hike with 4 16-year-olds, but whatever. As we were walking, my friend and I noticed he was walking really close to our friend. The only girl in the group, like he could smell her shampoo close. We got to the top, sat down, and he sat down almost right up on our friend. With her reasonably freaked out, I made an excuse on why we have to leave early and we promptly booked it the fuck out of there. Nearly running the entire way down. When we got back to the car we thought cool, we ditched the weirdo. But no. When we were all in the car, my friend pointed out that this guy is full on sprinting down the trail and towards our car with a large stick. Being in a car, we just drove out of there very shook up. We chalked it up to some dude on some hell of a drug, but 2 days later we all got a text linking us to a news report about a guy that had strangled his wife and then proceeded to kill another girl later that night on a hiking trail. It was the guy. The same dude at the same hiking trail. We never told our parents about the incident and never went back there. Ever.
I guess he was just a kill.
Of all the things in the woods, it's people that are the scariest.
I was in the woods with 3 friends at night. A friend's house was nearby and I was getting hungry, so I went inside to find some food. Another friend came inside with me. 2 friends were still outside. Later on, one of the 2 who were outside comes in and sees the indoor friend on the couch next to me. They panic and immediately run back outside. I poked my head out the door asking what's going on, only to hear them yell as loudly as they can, "That's not Kevin." Everyone comes inside and calms down a bit, and the story comes out. They thought the friend who was indoors with me, Kevin, had been outside with them this entire time. Why? Because in the darkness of the woods they saw a silhouette about the same height walking alongside them silently. Then at some point it ran away and they were chasing it, thinking Kevin was running off for some reason. The reason my friend yelled "That's not Kevin" was to stop the last outdoor friend from chasing whoever was out there deeper into the woods. We still have no idea who that was or why they didn't ever speak.
Not so much hiking as walking home after work one night a lot of years ago. I normally got off around 7 p.m. and my walks home were uneventful. However, this night I covered a half shift for someone and worked until 11 p.m. There was a trail behind some train tracks I would take home to avoid walking beside traffic and whatnot. I came to realize that night those trails were a lot different at 11 p.m. than they were at 7 p.m. I happened across a guy who was laying by his bike moaning in pain. It didn't sound like real moaning, more like a kid's fake "I have a tummy ache and can't go to school" moan. I also noticed his bike was standing up on its kickstand. It didn't make sense to me he would set his bike up properly only to fall to the ground in pain. He saw me and called out to me for help, but I kept walking and turned to make my way back up towards the street. As I turn, I suddenly hear some shuffling around and the previously hurt gentleman yells at me, "I'm gonna kill you, motherfucker." He hops on his bike and starts rushing towards me. At this point, I'm most of the way up the incline going towards the railroad tracks that ran parallel to the street. I haul ass up there, and as I get over the tracks, my would-be assailant proceeds to hit the tracks with his front tire and flips over his handlebars, hitting the ground hard. He is now moaning in pain for real and makes genuine calls for help. I used a payphone at a gas station to call the cops and explain what happened. They get there and the officer explains to me this guy's a village idiot who does this shit to rob people. And it's not the first time they had to pick his ass up after he biffed on a bike trying to rob someone. I told the officer he threatened to kill me and he laughed. Dude wasn't even armed, and apparently has had his ass kicked more times than he can count using that little line of his.
I had that happen to me in Red Dead a few times.